I think a secure person to a certain point will need their partner to step up and show, okay, maybe you're not exactly where I'm at right now, but if there's willingness to sort of try to learn and like understand some of the reasons why a secure person does the things they do, then there's more sort of willingness of a secure to like stick around and try to make things work.
If you communicate things in real time as they come up, you won't have that problem. Like if you're somebody who's committed to communicating, when there's an issue, you'll address it head on before it gets to a place of resentment, frustration, and from that space, you're most likely to have the best and most productive outcomes.
Her name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. I'm here with our lovely co-host, Mike DiZio. And in today's episode, we are going to talk a little bit about what happens if a securely attached person and dismissive avoidant attachment style get together and have a relationship. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what happens if the dismissive avoidant does the work, what some of the outcomes are that you would see. Okay, what the improvements are, where the relationship goes, if the dismissive avoidant kind of rises to the occasion. And at the end, we'll talk about what happens if the avoidant does not do the work. And if there isn't some growth or change or willingness to try to grow themselves or step a little bit outside of their comfort zone, make some of those compromises, what outcomes would you see in that particular case with this attachment pairing? So if you're new to this channel, hello and welcome. What we do for this podcast is we share a lot about different attachment styles, specifically because I was a fearful avoidant attachment style at one point and did the work to become secure. Mike used to be a dismissive avoidant attachment style before doing the work to become secure. And so we really share like from the inside point of view and sort of the inside scoop about what the experiences are like, what the intentions are, why things happen and unfold the way that they do. And we're going to share that here with you today. So Mike, if you want to kick it off, what's the first major piece you want to start with about what happens if a dismissive avoidant does the work and becomes a partner or starts dating somebody who's securely attached?
So we'll start with step one. Repeated exposure to a secure person can improve a dismissive avoidant's core wounds. So for the DA, their core wounds that are usually quite prevalent and they can be triggered very easily, especially like the I am defective core wound can really come up. Dating a secure person, they're very like accepting and almost like unjudgmental. And I know I've talked about this in past episodes where it's like, that's when a DA sort of shines and can like open up the most when they feel they're not being judged, when they feel like they're accepted for sort of who they are by the other person. That's when you actually see a DA actually open up and start to sort of share themselves more. The shame will be a lot less. They can feel they can sort of be themselves and notice like, hey, when I, open up a little bit, I notice my partner is like very accepting and not like judging and not sort of making me feel like, hey, like, whoa, that's weird, or like, hey, like that's pretty messed up. So basically, yeah, like you'll notice the core wounds, especially the I am defective core wound, can really, really be like brought down a lot for the DA when a secure person's there. Because again, just they're so good at like accepting people and sort of seeing people as, you've probably been through a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean like you're a bad person. So they can sort of, the way I see it anyway, is like see people from like a higher perspective and not sort of be instant to make like judgments and like, label somebody as like, oh, this person's defective or this person's messed up. So,
and I think like to your point, so much of what happens is when somebody feels, like they're not coming from their own place of woundedness, we have so much more room and space for somebody else and to not be quick to judge them. So for example, if somebody has a big core wound of being betrayed or abandoned and they see somebody, having an unhealthy behavior in a relationship or not being as consistent, they're much more quick to kind of jump the gun and kind of, oh, you're this, you're that, and kind of be critical and actually not have an attitude of acceptance towards this person. And when somebody's coming from their own wounds and triggers, they make that person's, one behavior become their entire identity. And so when somebody's coming from a place of security, they usually have more room and space to be like, oh, this is just you, this is the behavior, and just have more room to accept the person. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the securely attached person is really good at communicating about the behavior. So I often say to people, there's something securely attached people do really well, which is they have an attitude of acceptance while still communicating their needs. So for example, you'll have a secure person go to a dismissive avoidant. And like if a secure person wants more, let's say, consistency of communication in a relationship, they'll go to the dismissive avoidant. They'll say, hey, I really enjoy where this is going. I really appreciate ABC about you. They might even say like a couple nice compliments or things that they like about the person or connection. And then they'll proceed to still honor their standards. So they'll say, and something I'd love for us to work towards more is consistency in our communication. That's really important to me. And that looks like ABC. Because they're not triggered themselves, they have more room to convey their needs in a way that's going to get them heard. So they're able to say, hey, this is something I want. I'd love for us to work towards this. They will also vet the dismissive avoidant to see, like, does this person show up? Do they do the work? Do they work on being more consistent in communication after I've articulated it? And because of this, it allows for both of them to have growth, right? The securely attached person sees growth in the direction they want in the relationship with their partner. And the dismissive avoidant themselves gets to grow by working on those compromises. And because the dismissive avoidant has this like shame defectiveness wound, like you were saying, when this happens, the securely attached person, they get to see this dismissive avoidant individual not have that wound triggered. And the dismissive avoidant has more bandwidth to hear because they don't feel criticized or shot down or judged. And that's such a huge fundamental part of making a long-term connection work with an avoidant to begin with.
Yeah, 100%. So well said. And like you said, like secures don't take things as personal. They're not just going to sort of, if they don't like something they see or a behavior that they don't like, they're not just going to sort of internalize it, but they're not going to like get triggered by it and sort of like have the need to like fire back and be like, why are you always doing this? Or, why are you like this? Like they'll sort of come at it at a much more positive and respectful way that won't trigger, somebody's wounds of feeling like, you're like a kid being told, you're bad or, what you're doing is not good. And again, that you're just going to receive that so much better when you feel it's coming from an untriggered and a more balanced place. Also wanted to mention too, like it helps when you're being not judgmental. It helps when you're helping somebody not feel like they're not good enough. However, no, at the end of the day, it's that person's job to do their best to sort of not have those wounds sort of take over and trigger them. But in combination with the secure, we're saying this is sort of the best possible scenario where a DA can kind of be like, like this person's not judging me. So it can kind of start the momentum of them rewriting those core wounds with the assistance of a secure person. I
love that you said that. And it's such an important point, which is like, it doesn't mean the securely attached person is just responsible for the dismissive avoidant. And, what is supposed to happen is that maybe if you get somebody really healthy in a relationship, if that person is also doing the work on themselves and they're like, okay, they're developing self-awareness, they're aware of their own patterns, they're willing to do the work, their subconscious comfort zone can change because they have, let's say, sort of like a leader in the relationship who's showing up in healthy ways. And if the dismissive avoidant is willing to follow suit, that's actually going to recondition some of their patterns by proxy. But if somebody's not willing to do the work, you're going to have a totally different outcome, which we said we'd talk about at the end of the episode. So like you said, we'll stay tuned for that. But that's one of the most important things. And it doesn't mean that somebody's responsible for the DA. The DA is responsible for themselves and showing up and all of that. But it can always be really nice. Like everybody knows we're so influenced by the people we spend the most time with. And so there is, generally the person you're spending the most time with in your adult life is usually your romantic partner. And so there's a huge impact there for sure.
You also, you don't want to make it one-sided, because if you can imagine, if one person feels like they're doing all the leading, like I'm the leader in the communication, I'm the leader in the emotional management, I'm the leader in all this stuff, like I think a secure person to a certain point will need their partner to step up at some point and show, okay, maybe you're not exactly where I'm at right now, but if there's willingness to sort of try to learn and like model and like understand some of the reasons why a secure person does the things they do, then there's more sort of willingness of a secure to like stick around and try to make things work. Have you ever had a situation where you've dated someone and you're like, I feel like they're getting all the benefit and I'm sort of the one giving them so much, but they're not giving so much back to me. Have you ever had that sort of scenario before?
I would say a lot of the time that I was fearful avoidant, I probably always entered into relationships like that because I didn't learn until later on how to like convey my needs and communicate my needs. And then when I started doing that, that came full circle and that changed. But for sure, that was like my subconscious comfort zone for sure in previous relationships. I mean, not always actually. If I look back, there was definitely some times where like I was kind of like the loose cannon in relationships and somebody else was trying to probably help me through things. There's a couple of occasions for sure I can think of, but I definitely had a bit of like the wounded bird syndrome, like look for people who need fixing, try to show up. That was definitely a thing when I was younger. But if we can go down the rabbit hole for just a second, one thing that's so interesting, just to put this out here, I'm curious to see what people will think or feel when I say this. A lot of people will say to me, oh my gosh, I don't want to do all the work. Okay, so I'll tell you a story. So I had these two clients. One was a dismissive avoidant male and an anxiously attached woman. And the anxiously attached woman, and not to like pull up like just stereotypes, it was just the first example that came to mind, but she was working like a kind of traditional 9-to-5 job. She was doing a ton of work on herself. She was like really in her personal growth. It took her a little while to like take the training wheels off, like to do it on her own. She needed a lot of support at the beginning, but she was my client for a while and she like became secure. And she had this DA partner and she was like, okay, I feel like I'm doing all the work. And he started getting on board. He started doing a lot of the work too, like trying to communicate differently, trying to be more vulnerable, but he was moving at a bit of a slower pace because he wasn't in like one-on-one sessions. He wasn't like taking courses and workshops and all these different things. So of course he was going to move at a slower pace. And she said, she's like, okay, when do I get tired that I'm the one doing all the work? And what was actually really interesting is I just asked her like kind of off the cuff one day, I was like, is there anywhere in other areas of life where he does a lot of the work, where there's balance across our different areas of life? And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking of starting a business and he owns a business and he gives me all this career advice and support all the time, all this mentorship. He actually pays a little bit more in our relationship for some of the bills, some of these different things. He kind of like does a lot of the stuff around the house, like all the fixing up things. We split the chores evenly. And it was really helpful for her. And again, this is not everybody's situation. And I'm definitely not saying that, but it was helpful for her to realize like, okay, I'm putting a little more effort into the emotional and relational areas of life, but he's driving a lot of the effort in the career, financial, even just like chores and things around the house, like fixing things. They were renovating part of their bathrooms. Like he was doing a lot in other ways. And it helped her get out of this space of seeing it as so one-sided and being like, okay, I'm the leader in these couple areas of life. He's the leader in these areas of life. And together we're kind of making this whole. And so that's not me saying like, only lead the way in the personal growth area of life and be patient forever. Like the person has to be doing the work. The person has to be showing up. You want to see progress to stick around. But sometimes it can help us to zoom out and just like look more holistically at a situation and see where there may be more of an even playing field than we thought.
Yeah, that's such an interesting perspective. And if you don't look at that for sure, you might just walk away from something. Or
resent.
Realize after like, oh my gosh, this person was actually showed up pretty darn well. Very quick story in that sort of realm as well. One time I was dating someone, and then it was when I first got into my sort of personal growth journey. And I was all in on it. And like you said, like I was spending like all day reading, writing, journaling, meditating. Like I was doing so much stuff. It was just like, you know how it is when you first get into that world, and people out there might relate as well. It's like you found gold and you're just like, oh my God, like everyone has to know about this. So my partner at the time, while she was happy for me and she could obviously see the difference in my mood and my demeanor and all this kind of stuff, she wasn't ready to sort of take that leap. And as each of the days were going on, I was noticing she was kind of like unhappy and miserable and negative. And I'm like, hey, like I have the answers. Like they're right here. Like, please let me show you. Like I found this stuff and I know the way. And she just wasn't there yet. But it was really like, I could feel almost like somebody pulling you down and like trying to bring you back to, because when we met, we were in the same sort of.
And it's scary when you love someone and they change, right? Even when they're growing and evolving, sometimes if somebody's not in their own place to be healed enough, they're like, oh, you're changing. What if I lose you? Like that can be part of it too.
And then what ended up happening, I was starting to think like, oh, geez, like I'm doing all this work now and I'm feeling great. Like I'm saying like, please, let's work together. Let's get you happy, or let's get you out of this, which is maybe, codependent. But I really wanted her to, feel good. And I saw she was struggling. But she wouldn't do anything for a while. And then eventually she started doing it herself. And again, that's such an important point. Like, it's good to like lead by example, show people, but don't force it on them. It's probably going to have a opposite effect. Long story short, she started picking up the stuff when she wanted to, and she started feeling like way, way better. And then the second half of our relationship was like unbelievable. Like the communication was great. We were like in such better spaces.
Same wavelength. Yeah. That's
But
really
it
nice.
is scary, and I'm sure a lot of people out there are the ones who are doing the work and are now thinking, oh my gosh, like if my partner doesn't sort of do anything, I don't know if I can keep this going. Or the flip side, where their partner has found this thing that works for them, and what works for them might not work for you. And you might be scared, like, hey, are they going to want to stay with me? Like they've really like leveled up, and if I don't level up, like I'm afraid they're going to leave me.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a tough area for sure.
I feel like everybody can relate. This is like, we're going way, way down the rabbit hole, but I feel like everybody can relate when you find like the personal growth stuff and it's helping you, and you like learn about the subconscious mind and the ego mind and all these things. It's like, you're like, hello, who wants to listen to me talk about this? Because you just want to share it so badly. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, come here, let me just give it away. And I remember, I think I probably told you this, but I remember like I had all these friends that I grew up with that were like these party friends. And when I changed, I was like, oh my gosh, like trying to just like preach to all these like friends, like, oh my gosh, you can heal and all these things. And I remember it just like, it was just falling so flat. Like people were just like not interested. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just wanted to be able to share with somebody who was interested. And it's hard to be in that place. And I think that there comes a point where you have to honor like, okay, if I'm so excited to be in this space, this is so meaningful to me, I'm going to share with my partner or somebody who, I really care about. And if they show up and they do the work, amazing. And if they don't at all, and like you said, in the first half of your relationship is a good example, that it feels like that person's kind of pulling you back, or you're evolving so much and there's not that like synergy anymore. It is okay to move away from a situation like that. And it doesn't have to be you cut everybody out of your life. It can be that you just take a step back and invest in people or relationships or potential partners or whatever it might be that will be more in alignment with you. But be patient, because things can turn into the second half of your relationship where things, got so much better and all these amazing shares that you had. But there's this really interesting balance between honoring yourself and what like lights you up and being around people who light you up and bring that to your life versus, running from something too, right? There's sort of like that in between that's really important to walk the line carefully.
Yeah. No, it's all super interesting. I remember that period too, like for anybody who is going through that now or had it, I find it's sort of unsustainable. Like when you first hit that period where you feel like you're learning so much and you're growing so much, like the amount of like dopamine and like serotonin and all that like pumping your body, like I felt like invincible. I was talking to strangers on the street and like chasing people down. I'm like, you have to know this. But just know, like, I guess my point there is like, there will be like a cooling period. So like, if you feel like you've gotten to this level, or you're at this level now where you feel like you're like in monk mode, like don't go sell all your earthly possessions and move to the mountains. It sounds like that would be the best thing to do. Like there will be like a cooling period, almost like the dating stage or the honeymoon phase when there's all those chemicals. You're going to settle back into like reality.
But it'll be like a new baseline. It'll be a new baseline of where you were for sure. Yeah. Okay. We'll come back into the rabbit hole. What's the next one we have? I just want to jump in here and let you know that we are doing a 14-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below.
Okay, so a securely attached person still has standards for what they'll accept and not accept. We touched on it before. Like they'll definitely communicate when they need something. But what they're amazing at is not shaming in the process. Their approach is, again, to be accepting while also holding on to their standards and sticking up for them. So
Totally.
yeah, they're never gonna, which is great. They're never just gonna like eat it and like just allow things to happen. Like maybe something happened once, they're like, okay, we'll let that slide, but they're not just gonna let things slide over and over and over and start to like let themselves suffer
Yes.
without letting the other person know, hey, like this is what's going on for me and this is what I need to happen for the future.
Totally.
So,
And that's something that I think is actually really healthy for a DA to be around, because when you have a securely attached person and that person saying, hey, and if you know that this person is generally very reasonable, very helpful, supportive, healthy, all these things, and then they're like, excuse me, like, hey, this isn't appropriate, or hey, I'm not okay with this, we need to work on this, or they address something, because it's from somebody usually who's like showing up in such healthy ways, it really, like, dismissive avoidants are very logical, rational people as a general rule. And so if there's somebody who they already see as also being rational, and then they say something, one thing that dismissive avoidants generally are good at, even strong dismissive avoidance, is not in the moment, but later on, they usually will really consider other people's points of view. So if somebody healthily communicates to them and they're like, hey, I'm not okay with this, I'd like us to work on changing this approach, have a think about it, get back to me. Dismissive avoidants are generally good at being like, okay, I actually do see that, and kind of coming around to things. If you put them on the spot or give them like an immediate ultimatum, no, they'll just feel triggered by that. But if you are in a position where you can address it, be healthy, be very clear about it, be very clear about what you're looking for instead, it holds dismissive avoidance accountable in a way that's actually good for them to grow. And it's obviously really important for a securely attached person to be able to address things or concerns or issues, because that's them self-respecting at the end of the day at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, if you lay it out sort of more logically, you can make them understand how that might make you feel like when they're doing that behavior. They could go back and sort of be like, yeah, I guess that does make sense. Like that would kind of be upsetting to someone. But it's that piece of, if you shame them or make them feel like they're defective or like messed up, they're not going to listen to what you're saying. Like they're literally just going to put on that wall and be like, I need this to get away from me right now. Like this hurts too much, this criticism. And it's that whole thing of, you want to highlight the behavior and not make them feel like it's something about them, like that's in their nature. That's like this, there's something wrong with who you are as a person. It's like, no, what a secure person's trying to say is there's something I need to be changed. Let's work on this. Let's find out a different way we can go about it. So you're not like having to go at the person where, that's hurtful, that you feel like, oh, they're having to go at my personality. No, they're just, okay, there's two people dating. There's going to be differences in wants, needs, and opinions. Let's try to find a middle ground without attacking each other, and things will be great.
I remember when Graham and I first started living together, and I still had a little fearful avoidant in me, but I had come a really long way. I've been doing a lot of work on like core wounds and needs, but I hadn't done a lot of like boundary and communication work yet. And Graham still had a good bit of dismissive avoidant. He had done a lot of like self-reflection and like taken the time to be clear about what he wanted, but we both had like some things to work on, and they showed up the most when we moved in together. And it was sort of like that power struggle stage that everybody goes through. And I remember I was really working on communicating. I was like, okay, I realized I'm like not the best at being vulnerable in communication and saying what I need and what's important to me. So like I made that my work. And I remember like what would always happen is I would say something and I would just approach it healthily. I was like, okay, that's my intention. And I would say things like, hey, I remember one time, this is the first example I could think of. We had different schedules. And so like there would just be times, and his was this like really chaotic schedule and mine was like more sort of consistent. And I remember we'd have these like bedtime discussions, like when are we going to sleep? When are we getting up? Like what's going on? And I remember at the beginning, I was just like kind of adapting to his schedule. And then I realized like, oh, I'm not taking myself into consideration enough. And I remember he was like, he's much more attached, especially at the time as a dismissive avoidant, to like his routine. Whereas like I'm like a little more flexible and stuff. And I remember he was like kind of like really attached to it has to be this way. And I was like, hey, I totally respect that this is important to you, and I will honor that, and I'll be flexible around it. But can you see how from my end, I'm coming like fully to your schedule? And that's hard on me too, because that's kind of changing how I'm sleeping and these things. And would you be willing to compromise and just meet me back? Like, you can have 4 days of the week, I'm going to have 3. And can you see how if it was the other way around and I was just making it all on my schedule, it wouldn't really feel comfortable. And I feel like I remember these were like early days of like having some of these like adjustment conversations and things like this. And I remember he took a minute to process and was like, yeah, like, I'm sorry. I didn't even realize that was happening. Like, do I do stuff like this often? Like, do I not notice these things sometimes? And like, tell me these things. It was so sweet about it, but it was like, sometimes because dismissive avoidants are used to like going in their own way, they've always fended for themselves and they're not used to like hyper analyzing everybody else around them and like what they're doing and how they're feeling. And so just taking that approach generally, and I would see this with clients, I would see this like couples that I was working with, that if you just take a healthy approach and you just even use like an asking for empathy statement, hey, can you see how from my perspective, here I am over here, and if roles were reversed, that probably wouldn't feel that comfortable for you either. Being able to do that, like, just generally, you're going to see great responses from dismissive avoidance as a whole.
I love that. Yeah, you really got to show them like why, like what you're asking or what you're saying. There's something behind that. Like, I'm not just saying that to have a go at you or attack you. Because I think after a while, you think like, if there's too many asks or too many things put out all at once, you're like, oh, my partner's such a nag. Like, they're just always telling me to do this, telling me to do that. But when you do things like break things down, or like, can you see how that would make me feel? Or like, hey, do you understand when you do that, that actually means I have to do this? So you basically just have to like help someone understand why you're asking what you're asking for. Don't just sort of nakedly.
We need to do this. Yeah.
Because then it's like, whoa, what the heck? Like, it's kind of jarring.
I think especially if somebody's like the more secure person in the relationship, like, don't unload all at once. Don't hold in. This is something that like fearful avoidants tend to do. Don't hold in, oh, I have these like 10 things I haven't communicated about. Now, on Sunday at 10 a.m., I'm going to sit down and tell my partner all 10 of them at once and demand my request. Like, that doesn't go well. That's just going to feel overwhelming. Do your best. And this is obviously securely attached people already do this, but if you communicate things in real time as they come up, you won't have that problem. Like, if you're somebody who's committed to communicating, when there's an issue, you'll address it head on before it gets to a place of resentment, before it gets to a place of frustration. And from that space, you're most likely to have the best and most productive outcomes.
100%. Should we go to our third one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So we touched on that's a good thing about the rabbit hole. We're touching on a lot of these things as well. But the securely attached person tends to foster healthy communication. So because the securely attached person is so aware of their own needs, very emotionally literate, so as a byproduct, they're going to become more aware of the other person's needs as well. And then a DA would see that and be like, hey, like, it's okay. It's like, I see that my partner is not shy or doesn't, hold back on asking for a need to be met. So they're going to see that and be like, obviously this is okay in a relationship. This is, allowed. So they go ahead and do it. And they're like, oh, wow, this is actually how things work. Like, I know DAs think like, I don't have needs. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't want to be needy. Like, these are not, I do everything myself and I've done everything myself. But at the end of the day, we all like have needs, whether you like it or not. You probably just haven't, done the needs personality test to see what your own personality needs are. But we all have needs, and especially in relationships, we all have needs. And when you start to be able to speak up for some of them, it's very empowering. It's the secure definitely sort of leads the way in that and just shows a good example of how to respectfully ask for a need to be met. So
totally. Well, I'll be honest, in the beginning of the relationship, I was just like, I did so much work on like self-healing, like core wounds and needs for myself, like meeting them myself, knowing what they were, knowing what my like goals were and what was important to me, and then doing a lot of like nervous system regulation. So I got really peaceful on my own. And then I realized into my relationship with Graham that like, oh, I'm not communicating my needs. And so I'm feeling frustrated sometimes, and realizing like, okay, I'm going to start communicating and see what happens to see if the needle moves. And it really, really did. But what's interesting too, and I don't know if this is like helpful for anyone to hear, but Graham was pretty good at like coming to me fairly soon within me communicating needs and saying things too. Like I remember one time I'm like kind of late to social things sometimes. Like work stuff, I'm on time because it's like, I'm taking it seriously, but social things, I'm like, oh, you get there when you get there. And I remember him coming to me and like saying, hey, like, I don't like that. Like, cause he's more like timely about stuff and talking to me. And I remember at one point, like later that day, he was like, oh, I'm glad that I could talk to you about stuff. And he was like, I've never really brought stuff up in past relationships. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like what, like, how come it's like easier in this relationship? And he was like, oh, because you bring stuff up. And so it makes it okay. And it was like, oh, cool. And I think that there's like, if somebody's, in that place where they're in the personal growth work, they're doing the work already, you give somebody subconsciously permission to show up and do the same thing when you practice being vulnerable first. And then it becomes like a standard or a norm in the relationship. And again, that's if the dismissal avoidant does the work with you, right? That's not going to be a guarantee for all DAs. But I would see this all the time with clients. I would have clients come in who are like one person. They started really plugging into the work. They wouldn't even have their partner come into sessions. And they would be like, oh, my partner's showing up and communicating differently. They're doing stuff. They're following the lead here. And eventually one person's, like starting the process of implementing those habits or rituals into the relationship. But then they just become the new normal. And there's no like one person having to do it. It just becomes what both people do and how both people function.
I love that. Yeah. Being the example, a lot of these things, the DA didn't have that example in their upbringing with their parents. So, you don't want to look at it as like you're reparenting your DA, but in a sense, you're just showing them like how a secure relationship sort of functions and some of the ways in that works. And a lot of times just a DA hasn't tried that before. So then when they see it modeled, they're like, oh, let me have a shot at this.
Okay, can I say something that I'm dying to say? I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Okay, I saw this video once. And it was, I forget where it was. It was some like random thing I saw like late at night. And it was somebody being like, oh, if you think that you have to be the one doing more of the growth work in the relationship, you are parenting the person, something like that. I just want to distinguish the difference, okay? Because that is not true. Just like we talked about, like sometimes you're going to have somebody who's like giving more career mentorship in a relationship or knows more about finances and is helping you invest. It doesn't mean they're parenting you, right? So to be very, very clear, when you are not speaking up, when you are people pleasing, when you are walking on eggshells, not saying your truth, when you're changing yourself to be somebody that you think this person wants you to be and never communicating your needs or your boundaries, that's when you're trying to parent. You're like people pleasing and trying to be what this person's expecting, to soothe them, to take care of them, all these different things. When on top of that, you also are not like actually seeing and looking for progress and seeing if the needle moves, those are problematic situations. If you're somebody who's like, I'm doing the personal growth work, I'm just more advanced at this topic or area of life. And so I'm going to implement these things. I'm going to say my needs. I'm going to tell my boundaries. I'm going to see how this person responds. And I'm going to vet, do we grow together as a result of that? And do they jump on board and do the same? That is healthy behavior. That's not parenting somebody. The parenting or caretaking is like, let me do it for you. Let me enable you. Let me not share my needs. Let me not speak of my boundaries. Like that's the crucial difference. And I just think that's so important for people to hear, because if you're on a personal growth journey and you're dating, what percent of people are probably on a personal growth journey as in depth as maybe the person listening to this right now? Maybe not a whole lot. And you're going to see that in lots of relationships, when you really start doing the work, you're going to see that, wow, I might have to have different conversations with my siblings or my parents or and if you lead by example and you show up the way that you want to show up according to you, that's going to grow everybody around you. But if you're like, oh no, I should keep playing by the same rules that I used to with these people, you're actually stunting your own growth in your life no matter what. So anyways, just
that's so interesting, because I've met so many people over the years, females, who say, so many guys I meet, like, they just want a mom. Like they're literally looking for someone to be their mommy. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, that would be really frustrating and upsetting. So are you saying if that's a theme and that's happening over and over and over with these people, that's more than likely because they're not speaking up for their needs? They're not
probably.
Yeah. They're just observing these behaviors and they're just saying like, this person wants a mommy, like, I'm out of here. So,
and then they're people pleasing it for long enough and then eventually get to a breaking point. So, and listen, there may be times where like somebody speaks for their needs or says their boundaries or like articulates what they want in a relationship and the other person doesn't show up at all. And then you're just in the wrong relationship, period. But like, if you're finding yourself thinking that you're like parenting somebody, like, okay, so like I have a relationship I can think back of way long ago. Not going to like share the person's personal information, respect their privacy, all that stuff. But that was like a big relationship where I definitely had like wounded bird syndrome kind of thing, where I was like, oh, this person's wounded, I have to save them. That's when I felt like I was like being a parent, because I felt like I was dragging this person through life, trying to like do things for them, help them stay out of this bad situation or that bad situation. And like I had my own stuff to deal with at that time too. But it was like I was trying to work on it somehow. And you know, but I would never speak of my own needs. I was like people pleasing. I was codependent. I was enmeshed. I was making that person's feelings in life my responsibility. I had a lot of my own dysfunctional patterns in there. And honestly, I think if people are going through those periods of life where they feel like that, usually it's because you're just being codependent. Usually it's because you're like not setting your standards. You're not speaking up for your boundaries and needs. And then you know, if you do and then nobody changes anything and then the needle doesn't move dramatically in the relationship, then you should leave, right? And so it really boils down to those things. But often when somebody's like the parent in the relationship, usually it's because you have wounded bird syndrome and you're not speaking for yourself and you're enacting those patterns in the first place.
Yeah, you're enabling the patterns of them playing mommy, and they're just sort of going along with it and complaining about it to people, but not really changing it.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Okay.
That should have been its own. We could do our own podcast just about that topic because it's such a big one. But anyways, yeah.
So number 4, emotional regulation improves. So there's usually a positive impact on a DA's ability to emotionally regulate. A secure person is really good at knowing if their partner is like distressed or something's off, and they might start to help them co-regulate. So a great secure person has like a great capacity to do this because they were modeled that in their sort of childhood life. So whereas a DA in the past might not have somebody or parents who knew when they were upset and sort of knew how they can kind of make them feel a bit better, soothe them a little bit, a secure person has a better sense of that and can sort of like help them soothe, where the DA at first might be like, oh, what's going on here? But then if they allow it to happen, we'll be like, hey, like co-regulation is actually like a thing. Like I think, you know, when I'm not feeling good, like it does feel nice to like talk about it with someone, or it does feel nice to get a hug from someone. And these are things they're just not normally used to. Like it's not part of their comfort zone. But when they're with a secure person, you'll see them start to like open up and be more open to co-regulation, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, which is, and is such a fundamental part of how we relate to people at our core, like in need or during a hard time. Like I never read the whole book, but I started it years and years ago. It's called The Shack. Somebody recommended it to me, and I just remember the first line of that book, like really standing out to me. And it said, most of our hurt comes from relationships, but so does most of our healing. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. And it's true. And like, you know, a lot of time healing comes from, you know, in its own way. Like I look at places in my own life where I had a lot of healing. And like one of the most fundamental places I had healing was like when I was in a really broken place. And I had this like mentor come into my life and just like help me see everything differently and put me on to sort of like a different path and give advice and insight. And it's so funny because, you know, that's a form of co-regulation, receiving support or insight or, you know, all these different things. So, you know, it's very interesting, but I think that from this perspective, like, again, to go back to the topic of like, how does the dismissive avoidant show up? Like from a securely attached point of view, you know, the dismissive avoidant, if they're going to be fulfilled in the relationship, they also need to be able to communicate their own needs and lean on people and be vulnerable, because if they don't, as you can imagine, what dismissive avoidants do instead is they regulate on their own. So then they're constantly needing space and constantly putting up walls, especially around their time, because that's their subconscious strategy to be like, oh, let me put up more walls, let me take more space. And in doing that, I'm then re-regulating my emotional bandwidth over here on my own, usually through things that are not actually regulating activities like numbing out, distracting. But eventually you feel like you move into parasympathetic nervous system, because if you watch TV for 6 hours, then you'll feel relaxed kind of, but you're not feeling recharged. And there's a difference. But then, you know, then the dismissive avoidant's like, okay, now I kind of feel like I have bandwidth to want to do things again. But if they learn to co-regulate with other people, they don't need this obsessive buffering of their own time.
100%. And I think the opposite of shame is like authenticity. Like openness, like showing who you are. And I think at its core, all humans want to be seen and known, but the DAs are more apt to like hide their authentic self because they think they're broken, they think they're dysfunctional, they think they won't be accepted because they're just too, broken basically. But really, like once you do start to let that out, it feels so good. And when you can do that with a partner who you just become so much more close and intimate. And I believe DAs are more apt to depression, more so than like people on the anxious side of things. And I remember hearing this quote that says suppression leads to depression. Mm-hmm. And I believe that to be very true. And I saw that in my early life as well. Like I used to be terrified to show anything about myself and would just people please and like kind of stay away from people a lot. And it wasn't until I sort of opened up and started like sharing sort of things that are going on for me, or if I wasn't feeling good with partners, that's when I started to feel like better, like just less shame and more sort of pride in who I am. And like, hey, I'm not this like messed up, broken person. Like everybody has their issues, but we can actually just be in more of a state of acceptance when you share with someone and you see that the person's like, okay, like, how can I help you? Or like, that's okay. Like, that must be really tough for you. Like, not everybody's going to judge you and, make you feel like the way you're probably making yourself feel. For the most part, people are going to be pretty compassionate and, probably thank you for opening up and sharing what's going on inside you. So There's just so much, it's so scary, but there's so much benefit on the other side of shame and suppression that, I just challenge anybody to open up. And if you see your partner's open to, co-regulating and sort of wants you to open up, maybe take them up on it bit by bit just to see like how it feels and how, it is actually a safe thing to do. So
totally. I love that. And I think like when you look at the root causes like of depression, like obviously there you can have a dysfunctional gut microbiome, that kind of stuff on a physiological level. And then people say we have a genetic predisposition, but epigenetics maybe takes some of the weight off of that. But like a whole bunch of unmet needs and a whole bunch of core wounds create all of these thought patterns that then create emotional patterns. Like if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm all alone, or I'm not good enough, or I'm going to be abandoned forever. Well, then how do you feel? Well, then your feelings are made up of neurochemical reactions, which are, if you're having a lot of negatively oriented feelings, you're having a lot of negative neurochemical reactions versus your positively oriented feelings from positive thoughts, from your needs being met. More positive neurochemical reactions like oxytocin or serotonin or dopamine. And then those things lead to actions or behaviors. But something that's so interesting is if you look at like an anxious attachment style, you can see where it comes full circle, right? So let's say you take a DA and an AP, and we'll say they have the same amount of attachment trauma. Mm-hmm. And let's say they're just different wounds. DA feels scared of being trapped, feels weak if they're vulnerable, defective or shameful, unsafe emotionally, these types of things, helpless. APs, and they can both feel kind of like not good enough. APs have a lot of like abandoned, alone, excluded, disliked, rejected. So let's say they have the same amount of wounds. Well, then let's go to like how they think. So then they're going to both think negatively about themselves, which they both do. They can both be very self-deprecating, and they're going to feel negatively. But what's interesting is because anxious attachment styles then activate, whereas dismissive avoidance deactivate, then anxious attachment styles, when they're feeling like that, they usually get out of isolation and they get into relationship and they look for soothing through people, which can be maladaptive if it's at the expense of ever being able to soothe yourself or have a relationship to yourself. But at least they get out of isolation. So at least their behaviors are arguably a little more effective at like, because like we just talked about, like sometimes seeing yourself through other people's eyes, people are going to be like, hey, I'm here for you, or hey, you're not defective, nothing's wrong with you. And so it can get us out of that state. Whereas dismissive avoidance, they tend to retreat so much. So that's just allowing that state to recycle. And usually the way they then quote unquote soothe is through things that are even more maladaptive. Like, well, I'm just going to drink alone at home, or I'm just going to like numb myself out with like substances or whatever it might be. So then that just further increases the likelihood of staying in that more depressive state. And then if you're not working on root cause, let's say you've got these, other genetic or epigenetic factors, and then you've got this, like then your behaviors are literally keeping you isolated in your own stuckness and your own, I don't want to say misery, but really your own like pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And that's so sad. Like that isolation just adds insult to injury on top of what's already existing there. And so I just think it's like such an important topic that could again be its own discussion or podcast. We had a discussion about this once, and you shared some really beautiful things. It was so heartwarming. If anybody wants to check it out, Mike shared some really beautiful things. But yeah, really, really important stuff to pay attention to.
For sure, for sure. Co-regulation, it's important. Okay, and lastly, generally because of co-regulations improved and communications improved in a secure DA relationship, the DA learns to have healthier coping mechanisms if they stay with a securely attached person. So just, all around, everything sort of like raises if the DA is open to taking those vulnerable steps towards these behaviors and these coping mechanisms and communication that they've probably never done before. But if they're open to like stepping into that, leaning into discomfort, then that's where the DA and the secure attached partnership can definitely thrive and survive.
Definitely.
But if the DA doesn't, I guess I'm skipping ahead now, which is the question, can this dynamic last? Do you want to touch on coping mechanisms?
Yeah, let's do it. So here's the end part that we said we would come to, which is like, can this work, right? Can this actually work long term if somebody's secure in DA? And really the answer to this is depending on whether or not the dismissive avoidant does the work. Because a securely attached person, no matter what, everybody's going to invest long term in their subconscious comfort zone. And it's usually the subconscious comfort zone. The most subconscious part of your comfort zone is like how you treat yourself. So oftentimes I'll see like a securely attached person be maybe initially attracted to a DA, maybe some of the traits that they have, maybe some of the needs that the DA meets. But if the DA doesn't like kind of rise to the occasion and do the work, then eventually the securely attached person, if they don't see changes in communication, the ability to address a conflict or a disagreement in a healthy way, improvements in consistency or compromise, the ability to co-regulate and practice doing so. Like if those things are missing, the first thing a securely attached person will do is advocate for them healthily, supportively, kindly, respectfully. And they'll vet to see like, how does this person show up? And if the DA shows up, the securely attached person usually has a lot of time for that. They'll be patient. They'll see the needle move. They'll enjoy the connection with that person and keep, allowing for that progress to take shape until they're both on the same page with that secure dynamic. But if a dismissive avoidant does not do the work, if they don't practice co-regulating or making compromises or communicating or sharing their needs or meeting the securely attached person's needs in healthy ways, if they don't do that, then eventually the secure person will leave. They'll just be like, okay, this isn't for me. It's not what I'm looking for. And so literally that major determining factor boils down to whether or not this relationship can work is, does the dismissive avoidant show up to do the work? And that's really where it breaks down.
Yeah, 100%. If I could just add, like, I remember in the past when I was super DA, meeting a secure person, and I wouldn't even allow it to get off the ground because I'm like, this person's way too good for me. So automatically my core wounds had won the battle. Like I wasn't even
free to disqualify yourself.
100%. So I would, and if it did go past a few days, I'm sure I'd try to like sabotage it or like just do anything to get out of there. Cause I always thought like the secure person is going to find out that I'm like defective and broken. They're going to be like, oh, this is like super unattractive. Like this person who like doesn't have their quote unquote shit together and, is just not good at relationships. So I always felt it was more of like, it was trying to hide who I was for as long as possible, because as soon as like the real me came out, they'd be like, I'm out of here. Like I would always think they'd want to be with someone more secure, and they could get someone more secure. So why would they be with me? So my point being is that was such a negative way of thinking, because yeah, even though I was DA, I was still like a great person. Like I still had very amazing qualities. Like when you first met me, I was like super insecure and unhealed, but like
you were like one of my closest friends so fast. Like you were just such an amazing human being always, and like DA or not DA. And so yes, I agree with that.
So my point is like, if you're gonna let those battles win, yeah, you're kind of doomed for it. Like the secure relationship, probably the DA won't be able to go too far into it. But if you see like, I'm committing to work on these core wounds where like I am good enough, I'm not defective, like just continuously try to rewrite those negative critical thoughts that you have in your head, that's also going to help you big time to be in that secure relationship. And there is a reason why they chose you, why they want to be with you. They probably could be with someone super secure, but the fact that they're showing you attention, there's something about
It's
you.
for a reason. Yeah.
Exactly. So take that as like positive and try it out. Like at worst, you're going to grow like probably a lot more than you did before. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I'd say at least give it that shot and don't
Predisqualify.
predisqualify. Because the only way you learn and grow is by sort of doing things above what you're able to do at the moment. Like, for example, when you take a job, you probably have some anxiety because you've never done the job before. And, during training, you're nervous or whatnot. But then you go through the repetition and learn and grow, and then you're confident.
And then it's normal. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of the same thing. Like it'll be out of your comfort zone, but as the DA, just know like you have to do a bit of work. It won't be like, oh, hey, I got this awesome person who's going to carry me through the relationship.
Yeah.
People are going to get tired of that, and nobody really wants to be the person doing 100% of the work. So yeah, I don't know my point there, but just
no, it's such a good point. And it's the whole point of like, it doesn't, if you are a DA listening to this, don't fall into that trap of just disqualifying yourself in advance, because like if somebody's interested and they're there, and then there's such an important part where like, hey, there's an opportunity to learn and grow. And it doesn't mean change yourself. I think DAs think, oh my gosh, I'm going to change myself and my personality is going to go away. Like, not at all. It's going to be times where like a secure person might be like, hey, I'd love for us to talk about how we can ABC better in the relationship. And they bring something up, and like, you just have to take a little tiny step of making a compromise and like maybe a little action or behavior, or send an extra text or whatever it might be. It's not going to change your personality. It's just going to help you grow outside of your comfort zone in ways that are helpful or healthy for you. So yeah, just important reference point. And it's interesting too. Like, I remember when I was fearful avoidant, and people were secure, I'd be like, this is boring. Like, what? Where's the roller coaster of things? And it's funny how we choose so much long-term from that subconscious comfort zone, because my nervous system was in chaos and total dysregulation for so long and for so many years, that it's like you see somebody who comes in and they want to connect with you or whatever it might be. And there's all these ways we tend to sabotage. Usually you're going to see people who end up with a secure person who are like partially DA, partially FA. That's usually going to be the way that it goes. That actually invest long-term, who don't have as much intense FA or DA or even AP in their attachment patterning. But for anybody listening, still super important to be aware of. Yeah,
well said. So good luck to the secures with the DAs and vice versa.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks everybody for listening, for watching, for stopping by. If you listen to us on podcasts platforms, then you can check us out on YouTube, or if you're watching us on YouTube, then you can also listen to us on any of your favorite podcast hosting platforms. If you want to learn more about Mike, there's his social media info down below in the description. And make sure that if you are watching us on YouTube, you like, share, subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth. And thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.